I'm going to begin this debate, we have about 30 minutes, by challenging our earlier panels who sat there very comfortably, rubbing each other's backs comfortably. I think they have confused, and I would like the audience to come with me on this, they have confused the word beauty with attractiveness. Because when our actor now gone, he talks about the beauty of these famous actresses. Is he talking about pictures we've seen in magazines which may have been touched up? Number one. Secondly, how many of these actresses we have seen without makeup first thing in the morning? What would they look like after a heavy night out? And it seems to me it's a question for us to debate, because at the end of the day, I think beauty is a word which has no meaning. I think we are all attracted to people. And I think the debate should be about attractiveness as opposed to beauty, because beauty is meaningless. Totally. What does beauty? Why, for example, did I wear a bow tie? Why does he have, the professor, this wonderful multicolored hairstyle, which is wonderful? Why? Why do we choose to wear the things we do? Because we would like to project a certain image of ourselves, because we think either it makes us slightly unique, and therefore, I think, more attractive. What do you think? Because you haven't spoken before, Yasmin.
I think you're right, but I think...
Oh, I like to say, oh, that's good. I like that.
I just want to say a couple of things before I talk about what Ian had asked me to talk about. One thought occurred to me. Would I ever want to marry one of you? Because although it would come free, all the stuff you could do to perfect the woman in your life, you would also see every line, wouldn't you, as it came. It would be really difficult to live with somebody who saw things the way you described them. So I was just thinking about that, you know, the advantages of new ways of perfecting the human exterior brings with it this acute criticism of what we are and what we're becoming, and what we inevitably become, you know, however hard we take knives to ourselves. So it was a question that I wanted to leave in the air, but Ian asked me specifically to talk about the cultural aspects. I think Louise is right in a way to be cautious, not to go with the, and I write about it too, but that there's something terribly alarming happening now, because there is a long history. I can't remember who, but I'll read you what a professor said quite a long time ago, where he said that the people, where is he gone? How women have always, societies have always found ways to torture women, whether it was foot binding or whatever it is we do now. You know, when I was growing up, and this goes back to what you were saying, I was deeply not pretty. And every time I went to the mosque, these wonderful people who were praying to God or Allah would say to my mother, not at all a pretty girl, huh? Don't know who will marry her, but very big brain. So she will be all right. So there was the personality thing, was almost,
you see?
almost a kind of excuse. But where the culture is important is, once upon a time, you could be fat and beautiful if you're an Asian woman or an African woman. We had our own standards of what was attractive. And in the last 10 years, that has changed in a very depressing way. Aishwarya Rai is a Bollywood film actress whom Julia Roberts said was the most beautiful woman in the world. Well, Aishwarya went and did something stupid. She had a baby 6 months ago, and she got motherly. And the whole of India has gone for her in a way that I cannot, you just look it up on the websites. So the idea that she now, and they're saying, why can't you be like Victoria Beckham? You are letting India down. So this is amazing to me. Africa had no problem until the first African woman, and I can't remember names, I'm getting so old, got the Miss World title. And that was about, I think, 10 years ago. We now have the whole thing we're going through here. So there is a kind of globalization of a very narrow range of even attractiveness, as you call it, or even the kind of personality you can be as a woman. That alarms me.
Can I bring in a little bit our wonderful audience who've listened and saw blood and gore? First of all, does anybody have any questions to any of the first panel? Yes, sir. Yes, you.
Yeah, I'm a surgeon, and most of the surgeons in the audience would not flinch when they see the blood and gore. I noticed the panel at the front physically flinched when the first few of them came up. And the first few that showed blood was simply a facelift, which is one of the most commercialized procedures across the globe. Should the people who are considering, rather than buying a conservatory or a new Porsche, having a facelift done, see something like that, rather than flawless perfection in the glossy magazines that they actually see?
That's a very
totally
good
agree
question.
with
Can I ask, yes, Susie, please.
I mean, I flinched hugely. I mean, I have a horror of facelifts, I'm terribly sorry to say, but... and one of the things I felt watching this today was it made it much, much clearer what the reality is that is involved in a facelift. And I mean, I think, obviously what most of you are doing is incredible stuff. And I think one of the things that's slightly confusing, and I think it was unfair of you to say about us talking about beauty, because we were asked to talk about beauty and we were asked to have a conversation, which seemed to me in total divergence to what these great guys are doing. Of course, what you're doing mainly is dealing with people who've had cancer, who've had terrible things happen to them, and I'm filled with admiration for that. I myself have had cancer, so I know what it's about. But I think where there is a really serious problem is about how people go in to have face procedures without seeing that, and I think you should absolutely be, people should be made more aware of that.
Right. Thank you, Susie. Any more questions? Because the light, yes, sir.
Hi. I just wondered if thank you. It is meant to be a debate, and I just want to raise a point, and that is that when we show slides of operative procedures to prospective patients or to journalists or broadcasters or whoever, and they don't like what they see, that's because they've got a sanitized view. They see the beginning and they see the end product, but they don't see the bit in between. And I think a lot of what we are pervade in the media and in films, and there's no blame attributable to the panel, but my view is that it is a sanitized view of beauty.
Louise? Sorry, what did you say, Louise, about sanitized views of beauty?
And sorry, I just wanted to
sorry,
make my point.
Yeah.
And my point was that even the models, when they turn up, they'll have good days and bad days. And somebody will say to them, they'll stroke their ego, and they'll say, your skin's not that bad, I can make it look good. Then when they've done the photo shoot, they look at the images back and they adjust the lighting and then they Photoshop it. So what we get in life in the media is actually sanitized. If you saw the some of the pictures earlier today about the war wounded from Iraq, what we get in the media is a sanitized view. Our whole media, our whole society is sanitized. The bits we don't like are airbrushed out, and it's not just to do with appearance.
All right. Media. What do you say to that, Louise?
Well, I think we live in a society now where we're seeing thousands of images every day, and it's not all printed images. I mean, they're TV, they're advertising. Look at Facebook. I mean, people pose all the same way. They retouch their own pictures on something like that. Yeah. I don't think you can just say this is magazines doing it. I mean, the truth is the sales of magazines are actually, in decline. They no longer have the great power that they used to have because, the internet has changed everything.
I'm going to throw, just before the audience comes in, a question to the panel. Because of talking about beauty, attractiveness, and especially in your work, Susie, of choosing actors. What if you're casting for a horror movie like Boris Karloff? I mean, I'll be the ideal candidate, I know that. Or The Hunchback, I can play that very easily. But, I mean, you will have to choose an actor or actress because that's what is required. Somebody who's physically unattractive, I suppose.
No.
you'll still choose unattractive and then make him unattractive.
Well, John
like
Hurt,
that.
I mean, in The Elephant
I like
Man, or
that.
whatever. I mean,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. You use
use
prosthetics or
Yeah.
whatever.
The other
Choose a
point
good
I want to
actor.
throw for discussion, which is something in my work, which is I'm a criminal lawyer, the number of heavy criminals who have hit the headlines, who many women write to and want to marry them. I mean, this is where you, Professor, come in. I mean, what's the phenomenon? Why would somebody who's generally physically, he looks sort of unlike the figures we've seen today, and has committed a number of murders, and yet people write to him wanting to marry him immediately he comes out once he served his 20-year sentence? What's your explanation?
I'm surprised, but
Oh, well,
I mean,
come
if we
to my
look at
circle,
if we look at a dimension of masculinity, I guess the criminals you're talking about would conform to the ultra-masculine ones, and women vary in their attraction to
But
this
my
dimension.
point, it tends to turn on its head the concept of beauty and attractiveness. It comes
Yeah.
back to this original point
The bad
that
guys.
attractiveness is, frankly, not related to some abstract concept of beauty. Does anybody else want to chip in on our discussion?
Yes.
Yes, please.
I think Andrew introduced a new concept, which is normality. And I think normality comes closer with beauty as opposed to attractiveness. I mean, if, for example, who has the right to draw the line between beauty and normality and attractiveness? Because, as my colleague mentioned, if we keep on showing these pictures, operative pictures to patients, then we may actually deprive patients from seeking normality, which could be appropriate. For example, for patients who have minor deformities. If they show these pictures, we might actually sort of deprive them from the right to seek orthognathic surgery, hence normality, which could be attractive in a sense. So who has the right to draw this line?
But can I just throw it back at you before we ask the panel? But what is normality? Are we conditioned by the media, by Louise publications, which draw up this male model which has got this flat tummy, which I've never had? And I mean, you know, but who decides the normality? That, to me, that is a question of debate. Who draws this normality? Where does it come from? And Yasmin touched upon it in different cultures. I mean, I can throw this point when my late mother, bless her, I used to run in the old days, I used to be fit, and I had a friend of mine who had a big belly. And in her Arab mind, if you have a belly and you're a man, it's success. She would say, what are you doing? Why are you losing weight? Look at your cousin, he's fat. So you see, these images of fatness indicate wealth, success, and that you are, you know. At the back, I can't see. So can we deal with this gentleman's question first? Who would like to deal with it?
It's very interesting, actually, going back to a little earlier, the strength of reaction from non-surgeons to a surgical procedure. I mean, actually, it gives you the whole reason for the surgery, because one's trying to get back to normality from something that's obviously not. And the public, us, have a strong reaction. We have a gut reaction when something is so unusual. And of course, the difference between attractiveness and beauty, we can love our partner. We know they're not normal, but we still love them. But when they go so far away from normality,
you haven't dealt with the point. Who defines? Are we conditioned? How are we conditioned by this normality? Anyway, we'll come to that. There is a question at the back. Where is that?
Thank you very much.
Are there no ladies asking questions? This is all male-oriented. Terrible.
I'd like to ask a question of the panel. We're faced as surgeons with a dilemma. You've seen some fantastic surgery, and I'm primarily talking about the patients who have relatively minor deviations from normality. For those of us who are surgeons, orthognathic surgery, facelifting, rhinoplasty. We're faced with a dilemma. We have a patient who we know we can help, who we know pretty much will be psychologically significantly improved as a result of the surgery, and they will be healthier in global terms. But on the other hand, by providing such surgery, we're just reinforcing society's view that that is the desired approach. And There's been some view in the panel that the media has some responsibility for making the public more demanding. Do we as surgeons have some responsibility for providing the service and pandering to people's needs? So we have a dilemma, and I'd be interested in the panel's view on that.
Well, I think we respond to a demand, don't we? I mean, people come to us and say, can you help me? This is my problem. What can you do about it? And of course, we have the skills to do that. And it's very difficult to say, no, go away. I don't want to pander to the, you know, the pressures that are being forced on society by the media, for instance. And, you know, let's not forget that a lot of these people are responding to these ideal images they see in the press. And this is fashion. This is a fashion industry, isn't it? It's an extension of the fashion industry.
Fashion has become a lot more fashionable. In the time that I've been working, sort of 30 years in newspapers and magazines, it's really absolutely evident that, you know, in the time I was in Vogue, if you compared the number of words in Vogue when I was there as a features director with now, I mean, it would be, you know, probably half as many words now, because there are so many more images, because, and really it's a commercial thing, you know, the pressure of the advertisers in a magazine, in a fashion magazine, dictate that they want more fashion. And you've also got the big sort of, what's happened with the celebrity trend as well, because when I started in magazines, models did covers, models did shoots, that's what it was all about. You might have an interview with a sculptor, or you might, you know, when I was at Vogue, I commissioned a piece from a female journalist about what it was like to report on the Fred and Rosemary West trial. I mean, you would never get that in any, you know, not Vogue,
well,
not any, no women's magazine.
I mean, the reason for that presumably is that people don't want to read it, so it doesn't sell magazines. And
well,
it all comes down to money in the end, doesn't it?
Yes, it comes down to money, and the money is because fashion has become such a pressure, and you know, that advertising, that availability, the high street, the whole thing.
Yasmin?
I don't know,
Sorry.
I think there's a
Can I ask Yasmin? Sorry, just then I'll let you come in. Yasmin, straight.
What I think is also that we haven't talked much about psychology, which is very important. Whatever magazine images you look at, the whole issue of self-esteem, or who you are and who you want to be, is a very difficult, very thorny. I mean, when you've had a serious injury, it is relatively easy to return to a kind of normality and feel real happiness, as you were saying, you know, that it's what they expect at the end of it. But where it's something really complicated, where you look at yourself in the mirror, and it has happened to me, and you see somebody who is deeply unattractive, and on the surface people think you're really smart, you're really full of confidence, and you are, but it's that image of yourself in the mirror. Now, how society deals with that, at the moment it seems to me everybody's exploiting it. Everybody's exploiting that insecurity instead of helping heal it. And I don't know how which is the only reason ever I can think of, because I'm against veiling altogether. But the one thing I think is, actually, if you did veil yourself, you are completely invisible to yourself, and therefore you can't even judge yourself. Do you know what I mean? So there is a healing issue. I think everybody's...
It should be men and women then.
And it is a gender issue.
I just want to say that, I mean, which brings in all of these things. I mean, I do think that as a society we've become more superficial and shallow in you know, what you're saying about half the amount in Vogue that's written, the films that we watch now, everything is towards a slighter, shallower society. And I think we've all got to make an effort to bring back, you know, more intelligent, more thinking way of being.
Can I have the gentleman there again?
James Partridge from a charity called Changing Faces. Can I just throw a couple of thoughts to the panel, please? Firstly, I think we are possibly entering a world in which facial diversity is becoming more celebrated. I'd like to think that actually we are now welcoming people with different sorts of faces in all sorts of different guises. And I would like to feel that this audience and your profession here is part of that community that's celebrating facial diversity. And we have a campaign at Changing Faces. It's all about face equality, like race equality. And I would like to challenge your profession to actually join that, because I think many of the patients, and I really do congratulate Andrew Daywood for an outstanding, I thought that was a fantastic presentation of the work that you do to help patients get back to, as you say, normality or near normality. But there are thousands of patients, millions probably across the planet, and they're not all patients, they're citizens, living, looking different. And I think we need to, as a culture, help that to happen. And can I just make one other point about individual adjustment? Because you've made a lot of points about how personality and attractiveness and so on needs to be recovered. What I think we've learned at Changing Faces, and with great support from the Centre for Appearance Research in Bristol, is that we know that people's self-esteem is made up of many different facets, one of which is their physical appearance, but also, of course, their brains and their intellect, their interests, their skills, and possibly more than anything, in the first moments of meeting anybody, the communication skills that they have, the capacity to reach across the barrier that we all have with other people. And I'd like to suggest as a second thing that your profession needs to see how you can build in the strengthening of these other facets of somebody's capacity to live and love and succeed in our society. Changing Faces practitioners are now entering the NHS, and we hope that we will be able to work with you and have these practitioners in your teams helping your patients build so that they can face the world with confidence.
Thank you very much. Andrew, can I ask you to deal with that, especially the diversity point?
Just looking at the press, I do feel that whether it is in print or online, because it's still the press now, which is moving online more and more, it's just so one-sided. We only see beauty, beauty, beauty. No one wants to write about the things that don't work, the things that go wrong. No one wants to talk about, well, not 10 years younger, but 10 years later. And I think 10 years later is really important, because we've got some very young people having surgery, and who knows what they're going to look like. Even silly things like dental veneers. I mean, it really is worrying that we don't look ahead. I don't know what these things look like, and I'm in the profession many years later. And I think that needs to be represented in the press as well. It would be nice to see that addressed.
Paul, as the fellow.
I mean, we know what age changes occur. I mean, one of my other things I do in my day job is the treatment of facial deformity, not cosmetic surgery necessarily, but treating people with unusual faces. And we call that orthognathic surgery. And increasingly, we are thinking ahead, and we are looking, when we're formulating our treatment plans, to take into account the long-term effects of the movements of jaws, etc., that we're going to do. Because we know that certain things are going to happen with age, certain changes are going to occur. I touched on some of them here, just for the purposes of the cosmetic thing. But there are other changes too. And, you know, you're quite right, this is the next step. I mean, this is, you know, getting a fantastic result one day, but of course what we're aiming at now is trying to get lasting effects, you know, that do look good in 10 years. That's what it's all about, I think. And I think you're quite right.
Are there any questions from the floor? Sir? Yes? Yes, you? Thank you.
And I suppose many people in the room have, you know, young, not that young, 20-year-old daughter who's not unattractive, she's not dim, but when she comes home, what does she do? She sits in front of the telly and mindlessly watches America's Next Top Model and things like that. Now, one of the things that really worries me is the advertising industry for cosmetic surgery seems to be entirely out of control. It's almost like, you know, smoking or alcohol was 50 years ago, and we didn't consider the public health issues related to those activities. And I guess my question for the panel is, are we just missing out on our moral obligation to be a little bit more honest about what cosmetic surgery can and can't do? And if we don't do that, are we not storing up trouble, you know, psychological or physical, for ourselves as a society as a whole? It really worries me.
As the ex-editor, deputy editor of Vogue, what do you say about that?
Well, I don't want, you know, I don't think Vogue's got anything to do with America's Next Top Model. I mean, you know, there are a lot of programs like that, that's an American one. You know, The Only Way is Essex, Made in Chelsea, they're all like that. You know, 10 years younger, whatever. That they're very much based on what people look like. And I think, you know, anyone with a child that age has seen them stretched out on the sofa, you know, sucking it all up. But I think they are also bringing a bit of judgment to it as well. They are not queuing up to have those kind of things done. But I do think, I agree that the advertising in these areas is good, and I'm rather pleased about the whole, you know, furore over the French implants, the breast implants, that may in fact not be particularly dangerous, but at least have made people really sit up and think about what they've been doing.
Thank you. Yasmin, what do you think about the moral
I think that's
argument?
a really, really important question. And what I think should be happening is just like when one goes for an abortion, there is somebody to sit with you and talk to you before you make that choice as to why you're doing this. Some of the examples you showed, for example, didn't seem to me at all necessary in some ways, although I understand female anxiety. In every surgery, there needs to be somebody sitting there talking to the person who's wanting the surgery. And it's very interesting that most plastic surgeons, using an old-fashioned word, aesthetic surgeons, are male, and the majority of patients are female. There is the gender politics going on here too. So I think the least the industry could do is have an intermediary, independent voice to talk to people who are not going for the necessary surgery, but
I think that's right.
For changes.
I mean, I think the psychologically vulnerable should be counselled. There's no doubt about that. I think the question of advertising.
Yasmin is suggesting that for every operation there should be.
Well,
somebody.
I don't think that's practical. I mean, it's as
Why
simple
not?
as that. It's just impossible.
Right.
There's just too many patients, and you could never do it. But just coming back to the business about
money being
advertising.
made.
Sorry, can we just deal with advertising and then?
All right.
So I missed the aside from Yasmin. I
I
always
just
love her
said there's
aside.
enough money being made. I don't see why that can't be part of how the industry works. I really don't.
I mean, would you say even in cases that the ones that Ian...
No, I'm not talking about.
So you're drawing
they obviously have to do
Well,
work.
if you buy cigarettes, you don't have someone who pops up and goes, before you take
No,
smoke
but
that
cigarettes-
cigarette.
No, but
I
you
mean,
see
I do agree
photographs
with
of-
you, though,
yeah,
because they do have a warning on the packet.
Yeah,
And
it's a
maybe
good
there
point, I
just
think.
needs to be a bit
All
more
right.
of a warning on the packet.
Sorry, hang on, sorry, Paul, sorry,
just-
Ian, I know it's your show, but I have got Ian,
Paul, yeah.
Paul.
I was just going to respond to Ian's question, actually, about advertising. And, of course, in certain countries, advertising cosmetic surgery is not allowed by law. Now, it is in this country. It's not so long since doctors weren't allowed to advertise at all. It was considered unethical. But, you know, the people who do go for the heavy advertising are the companies such as Transform, such as the Harley Street, you know, Medical Group, etc. You can't open a women's magazine without seeing an advert from either of those.
Thank you, Paul. Sorry, we have a question from...
I'm only 5'8". I assume that's why I've been stood here. But I'll try and grow. To build on what Ian said, I think part of the societies and ages have always wanted beauty throughout time. It's just now that we can do it. I think that's part of the thing. And also what I would say, I agree with Ian, society is much so superficial. It wants it now. And I think TV panders to it. And if you hardly ever see an ugly face in many American series, I've just come back from there, and they're all the same. And it's boring, quite frankly. And to build on what Mr. Grant said, yes, beauty is shaggable, but I'd like to talk to somebody in the morning as well, please. So for me, attractiveness is more than just beauty. It is personality. And when you see a face light up with a smile and a laugh, for me, that is beauty, that is attractive. And we haven't really talked about that. And so I think we expand it a bit.
I think that's a good point. I think there is somebody there. We can deal with both points. Yes, please, sir.
I think we are discussing now about beauty and the search for beauty above all as in a bit of a demonizing way. It creates too much uniformity of faces. Practices are questionable. But for some people, that search is very profound and nothing superficial. I'm a cleft surgeon and work with patients with cleft deformities. Now, what they seek, basically, in terms of beauty, is no longer to be identified with a medical condition, but with a family identity in terms of facial appearance. And we measure that with psychologists and quality of life tools. Another comment is, you asked, how do you define normality? It can be measured, because today we have 3D surface measurements, and Mr. Adler, whom is a now retired consultant orthodontist, defined what he calls scores of averageness in different ethnic groups. And what you see is, in those whom have facial deformity and who try to achieve some form of facial harmony or beauty, you try towards that averageness scale. I think that group of patients, the same with other deformities that might also affect orofacial functions such as speech or breathing or pathological snoring, is a different search for a grail, which is very important for their well-being, compared to ongoing enhancement of certain facial characteristics. And those, I think, are more superficial. And it is there where a whole market is playing, where we as a profession have to ask, in how far can we really go in fulfilling patients' desires? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can I get the professor to comment on that?
Well, I would like to know, because, say, tomorrow there's a talk on dysmorphophobia, where I believe that patients can be dissatisfied with their facial appearance and want something changed. And there may be a grey area where one's going from an expectation of looking normal to being, uncomfortable with having, to be uncomfortable with a gross deformity is obviously understandable, but to be dissatisfied with a look which might approximate normality, that then does need the psychiatrist to come in and interview the patient. So I'm really building on this question of normality and wondering whether the industry, the surgery, panders to creating more people who are pathologically dissatisfied with their appearance. Pathologically because the faces to start with are normal. Perhaps they're not aging right, but this is, so that the grey area between being overly worried with a normal face and having something, a face which is very abnormal. Right. But we can all understand the utility of surgery.
Susie, in your field of work, you must deal with this quite a lot. Is there such a concept as normality of beauty? Is there such?
Totally. I mean, it's what I said right at the beginning. I mean, we're really discussing three different worlds here, aren't we? I mean, we're discussing the extreme beauty of the LA boring kind of beauty look. We're talking about attractiveness, ordinary attractiveness, normality that most of us have, and we're talking about people who have deformity. I mean, it's a tricky afternoon, because I think there are three different things out here that.
But can I just take you up on that? Because at some time, I mean, nowadays, it's quite considered attractive and beautiful to have a suntan. Especially in Hollywood, they all have these suntans. But I think, if I'm not much mistaken, during Victorian times, it was considered to be unattractive to be.
Yes, it was what I was saying to you earlier, that I mean, I think one of the things with Africa that's changed, actually, is that it used to be attractive in Africa, where I come from, to be fat, because it showed that you were wealthy enough to get food. Yeah. And in Victorian times, it was attractive to be white-skinned because you weren't a peasant. And now, actually, I thought it was cool to be white again.
Yeah, it is.
They
Yeah.
weren't going on holiday to
Even
Benidorm.
with brown skin, it's so loaded. It's to do with power. I mean, many African women have Angelina's lips. But they're not considered beautiful. And often they feel very self-conscious that their lips are too big. But on Angelina, they become a thing of beauty. Similarly, my daughter was just told by a blonde 6'2" man, she's at university, who first chased her. She's got my skin color, her father's English. And he sat her down and said to her, in the 21st century, I'm sorry, I can't go out with you. Somebody in my position needs a white girlfriend. Which has completely devastated her,
God, that's unusual.
You know, so the idea of
That's
what
an
is beautiful in
unusual-
one race, in one power sphere, is not necessarily beautiful in the other. So a tan is a good thing, perhaps, for some people, but a brown-skinned woman is not.
In certain cultures, as you know, unfortunately, there's a big industry of selling,
Yes, of the
selling
bleaching.
soaps, which are completely illegal.
And bleaches.
And bleaches.
But that is changing.
Are there any more questions,
have a
Professor?
brown
Are we
tan,
closing?
And
Sir.
racism here is changing a lot.
Just a question to do with the medicalisation of normality, and particularly in the pharmaceutical industry. And obviously this is a room full of surgeons, and we're talking about surgical cures for self-esteem and poor opinions of your appearance. And there's been a long existing pharmaceutical intervention to make other people look more attractive. Everybody knows about beer goggles. But what I was wondering is what the panel would think if a tablet existed, or if a pharmacology company was prescribing a tablet that would make people feel that they were attractive. Would that be more ethical to prescribe than surgery?
Well, that's a difficult question. I tell you, that's a legal question. I normally charge after 5. I normally charge for this opinion, but since we have with us tonight so many doctors, I'm going to throw it to Paul, but very quickly, like 2 seconds.
Well, hypothetically, maybe. I don't know.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.